Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play The Guardian Legend. In the last part, we went through areas 3 and 4 and got our way over here to area 5, which is now cave-themed. Also last time, we went through a majority of the game's staff over on Moby Games to talk about them directly, but there are a couple things we still haven't talked about listed in the game's staff. Right now, though, we got another mini-boss. I believe this is the robot once again that follows us? Yes, it is. So the things remaining in the staff, first off the game after the director list that's created by Compile. But the game was produced by Irem Corporation. Irem themselves were largely an arcade developer technically, but they also did a lot of producing and publishing of games on consoles. They're probably overall best known for their work on the R-Type series early on, but they also technically put out like Steambot Chronicles in terms of publishing, Disaster Report 1 I think they put out technically, Kid Nicky, I think, on arcade and NES, but also Kung Fu on the NES. They still exist, technically, but they're no longer developing games. They are largely relegated to pachinko and patchy slot adjacent technology stuff, apparently, which, hey, I mean, I guess that's something. I might not exactly care for its existence, but at least it's something. And that's largely the main development credits, but there are a few extra people listed in the US credits due to localization and all that jazz. Namely, the product manager was Alan Weiss, who did some scattered work with the company Broderbund at some point, working on Deadly Towers on the NES. They were on the product manager stuff for this, but they were also a product manager for Legacy of the Wizard, which is notable because that's actually a Falcom game. That is an NES port of Dragon Slayer 4. They were also in the Prince of Persia CD collection as a special thanks. They were concept producer on Secret of Evermore. A little bit of a scattered history there, all interesting all the same. Then we get to the US credits special thanks, starting off with Ed Bernstein, who started off with a Commodore 64 game called The Toy Shop. They were on Legacy of the Wizard, Guardian Legend, and Battle of Olympus as special thanks. They were in the special thanks of the DOS version of Mario's Missing, as well as the Super Nintendo version of Mario's Time Machine. But they were also in the special thanks section of Pissed, which was a weird parody of Myst that came out back in like '96. After him is Cynthia Wuthman, who, get this, given the rest of them, Legacy of the Wizard, Guardian Legend, Battle of Olympus, all special thanks. They're listed as a product marketer, so marketing department for the NES Star Wars game, so the run-and-gun game that's effectively an adaptation of A New Hope. But notably, they're also the Lucasfilm Games director of sales, rather, for Monkey Island 2, and they're still listed as the director of sales for its special edition on Windows in 2010. So boss fight for this particular corridor is a green clawbot, same deal. But because of the upgrades we've gotten since, we can actually take out its HP a lot more quickly, hence why the claws got down that much more quickly. Stay far away while the claws are out, but when the claws are gone, get really up close to kill it real quickly. So there are 3 more people listed in the special thanks in the US credits. One of them is Shigeo Okada. This is the only thing they're credited in. Afterwards is David E. Davis, who, funnily enough, actually has the most credits out of anyone in the game, despite only being in the special thanks section here. In fact, this is one of their first credits besides Legacy of the Wizard. After this, they worked on Cosmic Soldier, the Apple II version of Ys 1, they were product manager. Carmen Sandiego on the NES, they were development producer. Baby's Kids on the Super Nintendo, they were a producer, and I think that's kind of funny, because, ooh, that game's, rough. But they are also one of the only developers that has a lot of stuff into the 2000s. GoldenEye Rogue Agent, they were an executive producer. Metro 2033, they were VP for Studio Operations. Da Blob 2 on the DS and PS3, VP Studio Operations. SVP for Core Studios on Darksiders 2 for the Wii U. Their most recent credit overall is Metro Exodus for the PS4 as 4A game special thanks, apparently. Fire into the corridor, then the seal on number 5 will be removed. Pretty quick and easy, and thankfully the items we got through that first little bit, there are largely just landers to increase our health and chip. God, those rocks hurt. There is one more person listed in the game's staff. However, like with a couple of other people, we actually don't know who they are. They're just listed as E squared. I'm assuming that means their first name and surname both begin with E. Over here in this room, we got ourselves another bullet shield item, so we can upgrade that to level 2. It now costs 6 per second. Its damage doesn't increase, it's still whatever the power of your current gun is. But the orbs that rotate around you now rotate faster, so they're overall better at being a shield. In fact, I actually realized I forgot to read what the level 2 wave attack does, because we got that from the robot mini-boss earlier. That makes it now cost 7 chips per second. It now does a set 2 damage, and the wave itself is stronger and moves faster in general. So this crystal thing is effectively a weirdly more and less aggressive at the same time version of the urchin. It tries to move into you directly, but occasionally stops to fire out a projectile. Easier to deal with in some ways, but the fact it moves as quickly as it does can be a little bit of an issue in and of itself. Moving in diagonals is a pretty good way to get away from this thing because it can only move in one direction at a time, though. And for beating it, we get a defense upgrade, which, hey, I'll take. I like not dying, so on top of my ever-increasing health, I'll take some more defense to make it last longer. Helps that the endgame enemies do a lot of damage, so every defense upgrade there is, you should grab anyway. And there's another grenade, so now that's up to level 2. That now costs 5 per shot, but it does a set 32 damage. Plus, when the explosion lands, it'll actually grow in size for a bit after the initial explosion. So it can hit a lot of enemies at once, but also do a lot of good damage. I still ultimately prefer the fireball, but that's still at level 1, so hey, if you're looking for a high damage weapon, grenade's pretty good for right now. In here, though, lies Corridor 5, and the way we open it, we learned the hint towards it. You have to fire into the corridor, but they don't mean into the square you enter, they mean into the word corridor at the top of the screen. So fire into that for about a second and a half, and Corridor 5 itself will open, and we can finish our time here in Area 5. This particular corridor has an enemy I find annoying, despite the fact they're pretty simple in concept. Effectively, they are blue crystal gems that home in on you. But they spawn a lot of them at once, they move very quickly, and they move in all 8 directions, so anything you try to do to avoid them, you'll likely end up be preempted by another one moving at you from another direction anyway. The bullet shield can help a lot with them, as can technically the fireball if you place it low enough and just try to lead things into it. If you move in tight enough circles, the cutter laser ability can be pretty good here, because you can just hit them from the sides while you're trying to move laterally around them. But depending on what weapons you're using, they can definitely be annoying. Thankfully, once again, just because of how enemy drops in this game work, you're gonna get drops often enough that any chip or health you lose can be easily offset. On top of the fact, you're probably building up a pretty good stockade of enemy erasers at this point. And since we're now at Area 5, which is effectively the halfway point of the main campaign, I say effectively because area lengths are still kind of all over the place, you can use them no problem on enemies like this, and you'll still have a stockade ready for later game stuff. That's the reason I didn't use them in the first couple times we had them, because frankly there are better things to do. Although the enemy erasers can also be very good for the aspect of just getting more pickups, since it kills every normal enemy on screen effectively at once. More than likely, 2 or more of them can drop items at once, and that means, hey, that's a quick restock of chip if you need it for your blaster or other weapons, or even some health. For now, though, time for the boss of Corridor 5, which is Zib-Zub. This squid, the octopus, bounces at the bottom of the screen up towards the top and tries to home into you, and fires 3 to 4 missiles when it's at the top of the screen. Not too bad. Hitting it with high damage abilities can be a little tricky at some points, admittedly, because of how fast it moves. It is a little bit like Fleepa in that regard. But at the end of the day, you probably have enough of an arsenal built up that anything it can do to you is going to be quickly negated, honestly, so don't worry that much about it. And that's our time in Area 5 done. We don't notably get a key for beating this boss, so theoretically you could enter Area 5, grab an item, head over to Area 6 even, and get stuff done there first, but I'm doing them in pure numerical order because, not really much else I could do secrets breaking wise. And you only get some more enemy erasers for doing that, which, it's a little lackluster, but oh well. I mean, I guess if you're using a lot of them, it's nice to have the extra stock up. Area 6 is notably very close by to Area 5. It's the area directly below it, so when you get back to Area 0, heading left a screen, down 2 screens, and right will get you in there. But I want to head over towards the center of Area 1 really quick. Or Area 0, technically. As there is another shop I can buy an item from now that we have over 500 chips at any point in time. On top of that, I'll then be able to do another restock at the little P room towards the right side of the main area here. Namely, if we head over to this room over here, we can buy ourselves an upgrade for the repeller sub-weapon for 500. It now costs 10 per shot and does 7 damage per hit. Effectively now, the spiral it moves in is increased in the size, as well as how fast it rotates around. I don't think it technically moves faster from one side of the screen to the other, but it can leave the screen faster technically still due to its faster rotating speed kind of deal. This route actually did work out really well, though, as it brings us right towards where Area 6's entrance is. In order to do so, head north, then east, then north, then east, and you're there. Area 6 is a little funny, though, and that's a little bit of a revis to Area 1 in one regard. In that, the moment you go through the blue pyramid to enter Area 6... Hi, Corridor 6. So you can just enter here, get the stuff done here, and then immediately leave and head to Area 7, technically. In order to open Corridor 6, though, you need to actually press the A button to use a sub-weapon. Notably, the hint to open this corridor isn't in Area 6, it's actually in Area 0, particularly at coordinates X13, Y15. I think I showed it off, but I forgot to read it. Namely, it says, I set Seal 6 very well. You'll need a special weapon to break it. So effectively, use a special weapon and it opens. Pretty straightforward, honestly. Honestly, depending on how trigger happy you are in this game, in the case you enter a room, guns blazing just to protect yourself from anything flying directly at you, you might open this corridor on complete accident. I think there's something about that that's kind of funny. Notably, the little volcanoes you see in some of the stages moving forward are probably one of the best places to get some items done in the game, as just a single enemy eraser will get like 2 or 3 items on screen, at the least increase your score a good bit. I think technically killing enemies with the enemy eraser might give you less score than taking them out with a standard blaster or other sub-weapons, but because of how often enemy erasers drop, I'd say it's still worth it. Also, I should note, it's around this point moving forward in the LP where I start using the enemy eraser a lot, and it is pretty effective. But in the case you're photosensitive, every time the enemy eraser gets used, the screen does flash white for a brief second, and using that enough times in a row, I'm assuming that might cause some issues for some people. I should have been putting a flashing lights warning at the start of every single part, but in the case I haven't, future me in the second passes, what the hell? Go back and do that now. Come on, man, I mean, God. So while Corridor 6 is the plot corridor, and thus you can just enter this area, do this, and leave, we're still going to be going through the rest of Area 6, because for one thing, 100%, I mean, come on. But for another, some of my favorite items in the game are in this area, so even if I was doing even a minimalist run, I would still go for at least 2 particular power-ups in here, as they are just that useful to me. It is around this point in the game, though, where some of the shoot-'em-up sections can start to go on a little bit longer than it feels like they should. Like, they could end at maybe the 2/3 point of where they actually do, and it would feel a little fine. It's one of those things where doing difficulty for shoot-'em-ups is a little weird, where either it requires you doing a lot of instant kill level design, or just mobbing you with enemies to a point where it feels... I'm not gonna say uninteresting, distracting or hard to track is the word I think I should use there. So, boss of Corridor 6 here is the glider. It moves around for a good bit, invincible while doing so, but when it stops to attack and flaps its wings, it is very vulnerable. And when it stops to move and flap its wings, it fires 3 homing missiles out at you. I think it stops at, like, predetermined spots overall, so if you know the boss well enough, you can get through it pretty quickly. Honestly, it's one of the easier area bosses in the game. So for that, we get the cross key, which we can now use to go access Area 7 and beyond. But we still want to go through the rest of the areas in order to get other stuff done. Also notably, for actually beating this corridor outright, once it explodes, we get ourselves an Area Blaster upgrade. That makes the Area Blaster go from costing 1 chip a second to 8. It still does the same damage, it's about equivalent to what your current gun power is. But the 2 bullets it fires out move faster and absorb more damage before they disappear outright. And in here, we immediately got ourselves an upgraded version of the Blob mini-boss we fought all the way back in part 1. It technically takes more damage, but at the same time, you're probably not going to get hit fighting this thing as long as you're right up in its face and firing either your blaster or the fireball. For doing that, you get another defense upgrade, which puts us up to defense level 5, the second highest in the game. But notably, it also really increases your movement speed. You haul ass in top-down sections like this moving forward in a way I just find funny. 2 screens south of that, though, there's a multi-bullet upgrade, which is useless because it's already level 3 for us at this point. There are some items you can get more than 2 upgrades for in the game, but it doesn't do anything past the second one. However, the fireball upgrade we just got, I adore. That makes the fireball go from 4 chips per shot to 12 per shot, but it goes from being 16 damage to 24, which is really good. On top of that, the fireball is now much larger, moves faster, and it takes a lot longer for it to disappear on enemies. It'll likely reach the end of the screen moving forward, and it'll destroy basically any projectile moving forward. I love the fireball as it gets upgraded. It gets, frankly, ridiculous. Notably, it's around this point in the game where the dungeon crawling segments kind of become a joke in a lot of regards, as most standard enemies aren't going to be able to put up any kind of fight against you anymore between your extraordinarily fast-firing main blaster gun, the damage it does, and the width it has, on top of just the ridiculous sub-weapons you've probably built up at this point. And even then, that's assuming you've gotten every power-up up to this point. But frankly, given the dungeon crawler aspect of the game to begin with in a lot of regards, you probably should be exploring everything along the way anyway. Not like it's really hard, as the game gives you pretty free reign on moving around in areas like this. The only times you really get stuck between things are when you get stuck in a mini-boss room. And even then, those largely give you power-ups that'll make you very powerful against other upcoming things. Here's Corridor 16. And what's interesting about this particular area is, since the plot area's at the start, yes, you could theoretically backtrack after doing this optional area, but this is a case you actually want to move to the rooms beyond the secondary corridor after beating it. In a lot of cases, it's good to do those first. Not so much here. Do have a kind of funny enemy in this particular area, though, as we start getting, like, robot soldiers that just bounce along the bottom of the screen. They could be a threat. They likely won't, though. As I mentioned before, because of the amount of chips we have on top of our arsenal, especially the amount of enemy erasers, shoot-'em-up sections aren't even going to be that big of a problem. Though, as you might be noticing, this is the point in the game where the scrolling speed for some of the shoot-'em-up sections starts to get a little ridiculous. So I apologize if the bitrate isn't exactly anything that great in these moving forward, as there's not much I can do about that. Though notably, these stages do also tend to vary the scrolling speed depending on where you are. Sometimes it moves faster up to a boss fight and it slows down. Sometimes it's vice versa. Sometimes it goes up and down depending on what you're doing. Which would be a little more annoying if they actually had more in the way of active obstacles instead of just enemies. The closest there really is to an obstacle in these sections outright, barring the blue sparks that move from the top of the screen down to the bottom, is probably the weird eyes in the pits in the underwater areas back in areas 1 and 2, as those are, you're likely to run into those outright rather opening up the actual caverns. Now this is a genuine question. I've played this game somewhere between 3 and 5 times probably over the years. There's in late game quite a few times like this where there's not many enemies being thrown at you, and to this day I still can't tell if it's because they just didn't place many enemies here for some reason, maybe to give you a break before the boss fight, or if it's potentially me using the enemy eraser so much that enemies literally just don't get a chance to spawn, get killed too quickly, and thus there's empty spaces where they should be. Boss here is a red Octomon, which is really rough. It does ridiculous damage, especially with the seaweed, and this thing's seaweed gets real long, so there's gonna be a lot of cases where if that's in rough spaces, you're gonna take a lot of damage pretty quickly. Thankfully, with our increased defense, the seaweed's damage isn't as high as it used to be on top of our increased health, but it's still real rough. Although if there's anything that's really good about the powered-up fireball, as you can see, it does so much damage so quickly that it can even get through the seaweed really quickly. Honestly, the third Octomon, as long as you've gotten a lot of upgrades along the way, is the easiest one overall, which I think is kind of funny. For beating this particular corridor, we're going to get an upgrade to the Backfire special weapon. In particular, this is actually going to give us the level 3 upgrade, which makes it cost 40 chips per second, and it still only does whatever your current gun power is, which is a lot more at this point in the game than it was earlier on, admittedly. It makes the waves become full-ass circles, and they move real fast behind you to the left and right. Thankfully, they give you an inter-tank on the way out. Make sure you have at least 600 chips before coming this way, though, as there's another shop here. You should get the red lander there. Everything else doesn't matter nearly as much. And now we can just head south towards Area 7. Notably, you actually saw me clip into something for a second there. The collision in this game with panels is a little weird, where sometimes it's easy to slide left into either a wall or another block next to a block. It's a little weird, but I think speedruns probably use that to some extent to skip past some things. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 5, we're going to go tackle Area 7 and probably Area 8 from memory, and see what we can do from there. See you guys then.